Welcome to the Support Staffordshire State of the Sector 2023. I'm Gary Jones, Chief Executive at Support Staffordshire, and my co-presenter is Michelle Vodden, our Engagement and Research Manager. Thank you for joining us to hear more about the current state of the voluntary, community and social enterprise sector in Staffordshire. We're going to use the shorthand VCSE for the rest of the presentation. The report, which everyone who registered has received in advance, will also be published now on our website following this presentation. It's been compiled through two main sources of data. The first comes from our ongoing member census, which we gather from members when they join us and then update periodically. This is a source of most of the quantitative data. The second comes from a survey undertaken in early 2023 and is the source of most of the qualitative data about how things feel right now. So can I take the opportunity to thank all of our members who've taken the time to share this data. Only with your cooperation can we produce and present a picture of the sector and seek to both inform and influence decision makers who can make the VCSE sector operating environment better as a result. We won't be covering every statistic and every question. Rather, we're going to pick out the most interesting findings and speculate a little on what we think might lie behind some of the results. We'll also be looking to answer a few questions that have been submitted by you in advance of the session. So, on with the findings. Michelle.
Thanks, Gary. So we're going to start by looking at who our members are and what they do. Our membership has continued to grow since the report was written, now standing at 1,228 general members. We are also actively supporting 28 startups, working with a further 39 volunteer-involving organisations, by which we mean statutory organisations like the NHS and large national charities, and 23 parish council associates. We had 128 new members last financial year, which is higher than previous years, but maintains a trend of over 100 new members per annum. Looking a bit more closely at the legal structure of our members, 1/3 of our members are small and unincorporated, 55% are registered charities, 44% are companies, 12% are social enterprises rather than charities, most being community interest companies or KICs or CICs, they're also known. So referring to the report, page 3 shows both where our members are based and where they operate or offer services. The latter can be across multiple districts or the whole county. As shown on screen, the data shows that whilst we do have fewer members in Newcastle-under-Lyme, this is also where we are seeing the largest growth in membership. We also tend to see the sector operate across administrative boundaries in Newcastle and Stoke-on-Trent, where together we have the third highest membership of any part of the county. This should also be considered alongside the fact that Stoke-on-Trent has its own local infrastructure organisation, VAST, with its own membership offer. South Staffordshire is the most rural part of Staffordshire in terms of population centres, and it was the CVS partner that joined Support Staffordshire most recently. We think these factors explain why we have fewer members there. Perhaps of greatest concern is the historically low number of VCSEs based in Tamworth, a new town which grew considerably in the 1970s through expansions of suburban villages into large housing estates. May explain why community organisations have lagged behind, often relying upon strong community cohesion, which takes many decades, perhaps even generations, to evolve. On page 4 of the report, this gives more details about what services and support our members offer to the public. Looking at the chart, at least 20 organisations deliver in 27 different categories, demonstrating the huge variety of the VCSE sector. However, in broad terms, around 1/3 provide social groups and activities, 1/3 could be classified as health and wellbeing organisations, 1/5 would fall under children, young people and families, approximately 10% run community buildings, with a large proportion of those being village halls, and 6% operate environmental, green, climate action or animal-related groups. You can also find details of beneficiary groups on page 5 of the report, which tend to mirror the services with the top beneficiaries being children, young people, disabled people, people with learning disabilities, older people, and people with mental health needs. And we can see that over half the VCSE sector work with less than 250 people, with 40% working with less than 50 people. This is indicative of the highly local and focused nature of the VCSE sector, operating at neighbourhood level or supporting those who have fallen through the gaps of state support. Overall, we estimate that over 500,000 people are using services or being supported by VCSEs in Staffordshire. It's Gary.
Thank you. Turning to the economic value of the sector through pages 7 to 12 of the report. When looking at the economic value of the local VCSE sector, we have deliberately not included national or regional charities with large incomes over £500,000. As such, this is a genuine and perhaps conservative estimate of the local sector. The data shows a total sector turnover of over £126 million. And bear in mind that the vast majority of VCSEs don't manufacture things, they don't buy or sell much stuff. And as such, this turnover is mostly driven by employment and provision of person-to-person services and support. Even though most of these organisations are not-for-profit and as such do not pay corporation tax, those that employ staff will be paying employers' national insurance, and any that occupy premises may be paying some level of council tax. We'll look at employees in a moment, but of course their employees will also be paying income tax and national insurance. Behind this impressive figure is quite a lot of variation. Only 2% of the sector has an income over £1 million. Just shy of 3/4 of the sector have income under £50,000. Half is under £10,000 and 17% is under £1,000. Essentially, the local sector is characterised as being made up of lots and lots of small or very small organisations in terms of money. For the first time this year, we asked about where income comes from and how diverse income sources were for VCSEs. The study, as shown, revealed that 1/4 of members rely on a single source of income and another quarter just 2 sources of income, another fifth just 3 sources of income. On the face of it, this is quite concerning as it could leave groups vulnerable to changes in those limited income sources. However, what we found was that the most common source of income, by quite some margin, were actually from the general public, with 1/3 of members generating income from fundraising and 1/3 from subscriptions or fees, charging people to attend. I'd highlight that in most cases, this is likely to be on a cost-covering basis, not profit-generating. So what this indicates is a broad base of income from a large number of individual givers or users. And whilst this is one source of income, it's actually quite a robust source. It's a bit like saying that a supermarket has one source of income, its shoppers, yet there are many of them and they're highly varied. Counterintuitively, perhaps for some of our statutory sector colleagues, the research clearly shows that the VCSE sector is not, as some might believe, dependent on council handouts. It is still a very important source of income, of course, with 1/4 of members seeking it. Similarly, lottery funding features for just 15% of members. All that said, it's probably the case that for those who do seek council or lottery investment, the amount of money they seek and secure may be relatively large compared to smaller organisations who fundraise or charge locally. Further research would be needed, but it seems intuitive to conclude that we have a large sector made up of very many small organisations who are fairly self-sufficient through fundraising and charging fees, with a much smaller middle-sized sector that tend to secure the bulk of lottery and council funding. It's worth noting that amongst a large number of independent trusts and foundations, our own local community foundation features prominently, cited in 10% of responses. We also asked VCSEs about the future in financial terms, and whilst it was heartening to see more than half forecast that income would stay about the same, this does have to be offset against ongoing inflation, which really means that the sector income is flatlining or perhaps is on a slow decline. Worse is that over 1/3 simply said, "We don't know. It's too hard to predict." We also saw a similarly worrying indicators, which are set out on page 11 of the report, about the use of reserves. And finally, a significant minority, 22%, felt that funding relationships had deteriorated. Michelle.
So now we're going to look at people, which is on pages 13 and 14 of the report. We knew we needed to ask members about people, not only because their services are largely those delivered through people, but also because post-pandemic, post-Brexit, cost of living narratives point towards challenges in this space. Whilst the sector is not seemingly directly affected by the EU or international workforce issues, we did see potential indirect impacts playing out. As the graphic on screen illustrates, over 40% said staff recruitment and retention was harder, and the same for volunteers. A third said the same about trustees, those critical volunteers that govern all charities and run most small community groups. Focusing in more on volunteers, that crucial lifeblood of the sector, we saw the challenge of recruitment and retention contrast starkly with the intended use of volunteers. Nobody was planning to use fewer volunteers as a result of the supply and retention challenge, and over half planned to use more volunteers. Whilst we are in some ways pleased to see the sector hasn't given up on volunteer involvement, and we will do all we can to support and broker more people into volunteering, it will take some clever thinking if the ambition to include more volunteers is to be realised. We also asked about staff and volunteer wellbeing, which demonstrated strong resilience to the multiple ongoing challenges facing the sector and wider society. Page 14 of the report sets this out, but 76% reported overall wellbeing as the same or better. That said, the cost of living was cited commonly amongst the quarter who reported deteriorating wellbeing, that both staff and volunteers were struggling with costs. Over to you, Gary.
So our penultimate findings are about the future and local relationships. Perhaps the most heartening and inspiring aspect of our findings are on pages 15 and 19 of the report. Here we asked about whether your organisation was achieving its purpose. And as shown, more than half were definite that they were achieving what they'd set out to do, perhaps reflective of the flexible, responsive and agile nature of the sector, that despite the challenges alluded to, most organisations were still proud of what they were achieving. Just 8% were not able to say yes. One wonders and speculates if the public sector would gain such a positive response from its leaders about whether they were achieving their purpose. Supporting this was confidence in the future at a high level, half quite confident and a third very confident. The optimism was further reflected in priorities for the year ahead. Despite the financial and personnel challenges that we've already discussed, a quarter of members articulated priorities as growth in their reach and participation. They wanted to do more for more people. And 40% described priorities as sustaining service, compared to just 11% saying funding. And in an environment where finance is under pressure and sustaining services is mostly about funding, it is really encouraging to see that the ethos of the sector is about people and service, not about money. We also asked about some current hot topics. There was a bit of a mixed response here, some good, some bad and some ugly. Half of members, understandably, confirmed that they were working on the impact of the cost of living crisis. And really encouragingly, a quarter identified themselves as taking specific action on equity and inclusion or refugee support. This is really positive, given that for most organisations, it won't be a direct part of what they were set up to do. Not so good was that just 10% of members taking action on the climate emergency. For a subject that will and already is affecting all communities, take last year and the current hot weather, this is quite worrying. Sport Staffordshire is already planning more support to its members on climate action, and there is clearly a need for us to do so. The ugly I described was the fact that 15% of responses said that they were already taking specific action related to supporting the NHS or social care. And at the time of the survey, there were very few, if any, funding streams associated specifically with this in Staffordshire, which tends to show that the sector is responding to public need, not planned VCS involvement. This, coupled with the results shown on this chart that asked about local relationships, is a significant concern. Here you can see 2/3 rated VCSE relationships within the sector as good and either stable or improving. An admirably high 51% said the same about councils, good and either stable or improving. There's still some work to do there, but by stark contrast, 58% said that they were unsure about the relationships with the NHS. Similar numbers reported poor relationships both with councils and the NHS, but this was actually limited to just 14% and 19% respectively. There is very clearly more work to be done on cross-sector relationship building. I've spoken recently quite strongly about one of the major outliers in the form of East Staffordshire Borough Council, who have had historically a generally quite poor reputation for partnership working, but we hope that may change under its new political administration. However, the NHS is the relationship which clearly needs most attention. Michelle.
And finally, we're going to look at sector support set out on page 20. This means looking at what members told us about our support to them. Thankfully, the results confirm much of what we already know from regular member feedback and evaluations. They also reflected well the challenges already outlined in this report. On screen, you can see, unsurprisingly, the sector identified funding advice as its highest valued support. General advice, networking and volunteering support were close followers. To a slightly lesser extent, training, governance and marketing support was valued. In 2022-23, Support Staffordshire supported its members through training, networking and one-to-one advice. 575 of our members accessed support through over 2,400 sessions. Of these, 900 were one-to-one support accessed by over 400 unique member organisations. Last year, we supported 25 new startup organisations and 7 became full members during the year. This is in line with our long-term conversion rate of approximately 30%. 95% of members said they would use us again, and 91% said they would recommend us to others. Please keep giving us your informal and informal feedback, as it is crucial to us meeting your requirements in the best ways that we can.
So that concludes our presentation, and we're going to turn to a few questions that have been submitted. So firstly, we've been asked whether we can analyse the data more locally. Michelle?
Yes. All the data can be broken down and analysed in a number of different ways. In particular, we can generate district or borough level reports. It does take time and resource to do, but if this is something that you're interested in, please do get in touch with us to discuss your needs.
Great. Secondly, funding, which obviously comes through strongly in several aspects of the report. This does seem to be a real challenge right now.
It is, but it always has been. It's worth knowing that funding is consistently our most inquired about subject for members. It doesn't always lead to support focused on bids. Sometimes funding is a symptom when member group really needs to look at its systems, financial management, strategy, or its use of volunteers. But yes, funding is absolutely an issue, and Support Staffordshire continues to work with a range of local partners to try and secure and sustain funding and to diversify it. One good example is our social care enterprise work, looking at innovative ways for non-for-profit social enterprises to enter the care market. So please do, again, get in touch if you want more information.
Thanks, Michelle. And we had a question about what the findings say about resilience in the sector and what if another emergency happened like the pandemic. So I'm really pleased to be able to say that we have a new programme which is focused precisely on the subject of VCSE involvement in emergencies and the resilience of the sector. Our new VCSE local resilience officer is interested to speak to any group that has something to offer in a range of emergency scenarios, and there'll be more information shared about this soon. So we are drawing to a close now. Thank you so much for those questions and thank you for watching. The full report, as I said at the beginning, will be published on our website imminently, so please then do feel free to share it. And we hope that this demonstrates the value of completing our member census and survey so that we can give as complete and accurate a picture as possible. And do let us know if there is something that you want us to ask and analyse next year?
So just to finish, we'd like to thank our comms and membership team at Support Staffordshire, Elaine Denny, Claire Terry, and especially Lucy Rickard, who has made the data digestible and provided all the technical wizardry today. So thanks very much from Gary and me.